I like to begin, ooh, this is loud, and it's really tall. They don't know how short I am. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that the lands on which we stand are the originally stewarded lands of the Cherokee, Shawnee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Creek peoples who were forcibly removed from their lands as part of the Trail of Tears during the 1830 Indian Removal Act. And for those who don't know, I now live in Los Angeles, so I recognize and acknowledge that I live on the lands inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tatavarian, Serrano, Kush, and Chumash peoples, and pay honor and respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, as they continue the stewardship over the land and the waters. And I am Dori Tunstall, and I know later they're going to go through all of my resume and stuff, but what is most important to me is that I am the daughter of Teresa and Raymond, the daughter of Joseph and Letha, the granddaughter of Betty and George and Dolores and Johnny, and great-granddaughter of Katrina and Raymond, and descendants of many ancestors known and the majority of them unknown, Ashe. And I was born in Columbia, South Carolina, on the lands of the Chumash, the Pygmy. Can someone really fix the focus? Thank you, please. The Disto, the Santee, the Yamasee, Chickasaw, Waccamaw nations, and I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, Midwest in the house, on the lands of the Kickapoo, the Kaskaskia, and the Miami nations. And I'm going to talk to you about decolonizing design and how we're going to be all right. Now, this is a mashup of two books, Decolonizing Design and Cultural Studies, Cultural Justice Guidebook, and the foreword that I wrote for the book, An Anthology of Blackness. And I'm mashing these two together because they represent kind of where I am now in my thinking, but more where I am and want to be in my practice as it relates to the impact that I want to have in the world. So this is talk is in two parts. Part one is who we be, and part two is gonna be all right. The first part is going to go a little slow because I need to clear some space in terms of history and knowledge, but I promise you the second part is going to be glorious. So thank you, DJ, in terms of setting me up, because in the immortal words of Kendrick Lamar, all's my life I had to fight. All's my life I had hard times, but we gonna be all right. We gonna be all right. Now, who we be? Black folks are the most extraordinarily entities, not even like human beings, entities in the universe, because we have the ability to transmute pain, excruciating, unknowable levels of pain into joy. When you hear Aretha Franklin sing Amazing Grace, that's that power. When you hear Whitney Houston even sing, I want to dance with somebody who loves me, like you don't even have to go to the greatest love of all, but just like, I want to dance with somebody who loves me, that's that power. And you read the stories of these great artists, these great creators, like these people lived lives of pain. But you wouldn't know that, right? Because they've transmuted that pain into joy. And we do it in remarkable ways, right? Like, so we take pain and sorrow and anger, righteous anger, and we turn it into the joy of our communities, the joy of our family, the joy of being alive. When every single structure in place is designed to make you unalive, if not embody in spirit. And so our alchemy is powerful because it means that you, stand here today with a free mind, with a free body, and our souls have always been free. Our souls have always been our own. But let's talk about where the pain comes from. So I have lived almost everywhere, I feel like. And I spent actually the last 7 years in Toronto, Canada. Another place of blackness that people don't understand how black Toronto is. And it's a Caribbean black. So shout out to all my Caribbean peoples who are in the audience today. And I've lived in like Australia, Melbourne, Australia. So I actually even experienced a Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander black spelled with a K, B-L-O-K, without the C, right? And so every place I've lived, I've kind of had to experience a different type of blackness. But there is something that, like, why are we all called black in all these places and all this? There's something that unifies us. And the unification is our relationship to this process called colonization. So Ritesh was talking earlier today, or earlier yesterday, about Eve Tuck, Dr. Eve Tuck, and he was referencing an important essay that she's written, but I always reference the essay, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. And it helped me understand when I came to Canada and everyone's like, BIPOC this, BIPOC that, BIPOC P, and I was like, because again, I'm American, so I'm like, wait a second. I understand the history of the term POC, and that was created by black women. So how is blackness outside of POC-ness? Like, explain that to me, right? And that Eve Tuck's essay helped me understand that. So what she talks about is we all live in a settler colonial state. As a settler colonial state, a bunch of Europeans in the last 500 years got on a bunch of boats, settled in other places that required in their minds that they had to, and I use this word accurately, exterminate the indigenous peoples in order to have control over the land. And then in that process of extermination, they didn't have the labor, because they first tried to enslave the indigenous people, right? That didn't work, because those who did not die from disease or war or whatever just kept moving, right? Because it's their land, they know the land. So then they brought over Africans who, you know, they've been in trade with for thousands of years, which meant we already knew the European diseases, and so brought us over as excess labor to work this excess land that they stole from indigenous people. So that is like the 15-second version of what is colonization. In that process, indigenous people, original custodians of the land, they sought to assimilate them. It's like, if we're not gonna kill them, we'll make them white, is the best way to say it, right? And so that's in the relationship, but these, again, the relationships to the land, they're the original custodians of the land. That's why I went through that long land introduction, right? Black folks, relationship to the land, stolen on the land. That's why, like in the colonization conversation, like I don't feel the same guilt that my white colleagues feel, because it's like, I didn't want to be here. Y'all brought me here. And that sometimes is a little bit like we try to be innocent, like we didn't have anything to do with that. But you know, history is complicated. The interesting thing though is that we black folks are the unassimilatables. My name is Elizabeth freaking Tunstall, which means on telephone calls, people think I'm English before they meet me. English is my first language. Christianity is my religion, like 87, I think, percent of most multi-generational African Americans are Christian. So, and again, we're forbidden to play drums, forbidden to speak the language. So if you think of one group, in some ways, that the processes of assimilation was so harsh that I don't even speak my original languages, whatever they are, and I have to use 23andMe to even figure out what those languages could possibly be, right? That white supremacy requires that we are unassimilatable. And then I'll get to POCs later, but POCs, they're generally trying to find their way through the system. Colonization happens in their home countries, and then they come here, sometimes being enslaved, we forget that part, sometimes operating like settlers, right? But it's a complicated story that we'll get to. This is important because one of my biggest shocks was realizing that white supremacy has a date and time, place and time. Place, Maryland. And I say that in the sense of like, why would you be surprised that it might be Maryland, right? Date, 1681. 1681, that's like older, white supremacy is older than the United States, right? But it's not time immemorial, because white supremacy had to be established because there was this Baker's Rebellion where enslaved black folks, free black folks, indigenous folks, white indentured servants all got together and said, we're going to overthrow our European aristocratic masters, and almost did it. And then the European aristocratic masters all freaked out and said, we're gonna drive a wedge between those communities. So they passed a bunch of laws. Y'all can't marry each other, especially white folks. Y'all can't marry black folks. White women, this is where the misogyny kicks in. You can't marry, if you marry a black folk, you lose your status and join theirs. You marry an indigenous folk, you lose your status and join them. If white folks, if you join in anything with these other groups, you're going to get their status. And thus, they push the status really low. They pass these laws saying, black folks, indigenous folks, non-Christian folks, y'all can't vote. In a court of law, your word does not count. If you have black folks, y'all can't carry guns anymore. And the extra advantage you get for being white is that if you create a crime, you will not be whipped in public like everybody else. So we see the remnants of that today, that separation, that wedge that's been caused between those of us who actually have shared interest in overthrowing the aristocratic powers that be. But we are all grappling with how do we position ourselves in terms of status and privilege and just straight up oppression in order to maintain a system. But because white supremacy has a place and has a time and is not time immemorial, we all can actually get back together again, remove these wedges, remove these barriers, because if it has a start date, guess what? It has an end date too. So, but this is where I have to switch a little bit to have a talk with the black folks in the room, which is the majority of you, which is what makes this exciting. Okay, so in the book, Decolonizing Design, the first chapter is called Putting Indigenous First. And just a reminder, indigenous, the original custodians of the land, their relationship, that's their relationship to the land. And then, again, 500 years of attempted assimilation, including the establishments of residential schools in which they were attempted to be separated from their culture, heritage, et cetera, et cetera. So that is, in a settler colonial state, the original sin. And they've treated us differently in this process. So Vine Deloria Jr., an amazing indigenous scholar, rest in peace, he talks about like the strategy for black folks is to exclude from everything. Again, the strategy for indigenous folks was to turn them into white folks. That means that as Black folks, they've set up this system where we are primed to want to join the system. The civil rights movement was like, let us in. Let us participate in these systems. This is where I talk about, like, the work I do is akin to DEI, but decolonization is not DEI, because what decolonization says is, do we want to be in those systems? Because those systems from the very beginning are effed up, right? And so when we don't think about it, we find ourselves in a mess. So decolonizing design is not 40 acres and a mule. And again, just a reminder, because I still am a professor, General Sherman Williams' 40-acre mule came from after the Civil War. They said, we're going to give Black folks 40 acres of land, tillable land, access to water, and that we will protect that right. Well, broken promises, they didn't protect the right. But again, and this is where I loved Michael. Where are you at, Michael? I loved your presentation yesterday, talking about your relationship to your family and the reclaiming and the documentation. And it broke my heart because I also asked the question, where are those 40 acres coming from? And this is where we have to talk about putting indigenous first. And I'll give you a more contemporary one because I don't want to pick on Michael because I think it's a beautiful story. So as I said, I live in LA. And actually, where are you, Kevin? Kevin, Manhattan Beach. And there's a place that's called Bruce's Beach. So from 1912 to 1920, Willa, Bruce, female, bought some land. And then her and her husband, Charles, put a resort on that land, and then other Black folks bought into that land as well. So it was like a happening place. And again, they had to buy the land because all the other white-owned land, they said, Black people not allowed. So they created their own resort. In 1924, as we've seen many, many times again, and what we're experiencing now in the pushback around DEI is like, when Black folks get a little bit of something, people get upset. And so they petitioned the LA commissioner and everything to say, we don't want these Black folks to have this land. So they misused eminent domain, saying, take away these lands. And I don't know, they always say that we're going to put a park, which they never put a park on. And so they lost the land. So, but come 2020, the reckoning, the summer of the reckoning, and the result of the murder of George Floyd, LA gets a conscience and says, reparations, we will give the Bruce family back the land, of which there's already a firehouse, a beach, a whole bunch of like county, whatever things. And so, but they, again, like this was in the news, right? Everybody's excited. Reparations! We got reparations! And then the family was like, okay, we gonna do diligence, what can we do to the land? And all the attorneys saying there's not much you could do to the land, right? To redevelop it, to get Terry down to redevelop it would take more money than you have on the land. So they said, okay, we will sell you back the land for $20 million. But that land, again, that's the land of the Tongva people. And at least in a public record, like something might happen on the side that I didn't see or wasn't reported, but there's no report of the Bruce family giving any money of that $20 million to the Tongva people. So this is the part where it's like, as Black folks, we have to watch and be aware of our positioning in relationship to indigenous sovereignty. we have to be careful that we are not being used as a wedge to oppress another group of people. I love you, my Buffalo Soldiers, but we should have had a conversation, right, about what our role is and our relationship is to this settler colonial state. And I say this because as part of the reckoning of 2020, like, and this is why, again, there's a pushback, like, that worked. There were Black people in positions that, like, there were positions created to put us in places of leadership, to put us in place with resources to do stuff. And we did stuff. That's why everybody's scared, right? Because it was effective as fudge. But I didn't see any places in all these conversations like, where's the indigenous leadership? We're hiring more Black folks. Do we hire more indigenous folks? And again, I've looked at the numbers and like it went up like a tiny bit, but they are also the ones getting first hired, last hired, first fired, right, with us. So we have to be aware of the fact that we cannot be a tool of the oppression of others as we get our piece of the pie, right? Because the pie is full of rat poison, right? And so how do we build, not even like we can get outside of pie, right? Can we make some cupcakes that makes it easier for us to all share, right? And have our little piece of something. And that's an important part of us knowing who we be. Because we are not just designed to be part of the system, we are part of the design to dismantle that system. And it is our lived experiences of injustice that identifies the pain that comes with that unjust system that we have to dismantle, not just join in. End of part one, right? End of part one. That's who we be. So we are magical. And like I said, there is no, I've looked, there is no other set of people around the world who have alchemized as effectively pain into joy as our community. But we have to make sure we are creating the conditions of liberatory joy for ourselves and for others. Part two, we gonna be all right. We gonna be all right. Keep a head up high, and actually whenever I hear that line, I actually hear more Tupac, keep your head up, but you know, DJ will work on that one next time. But again, you know, we complicated. We are complicated. To love us is complicated, but we gonna be all right. So in chapter 4, I talk about decolonizing design means more than making amends, more than DEI. And I want to introduce a term to you that if you're not familiar with, please put it in your lexicon, the super token. Now, everyone, we didn't do the whole introduction thing in a way, but when, for the past 7 years until fairly recently, I was the Dean of Design at OCAD University, the first Black and Black female Dean of a faculty design anywhere in the world. Thank you. And so people always ask me, like, oh my God, what does it mean to be the first? Like, just tell us what that experience is. And I always said, it's bittersweet, right? Because you think about the fact that, like, yes, barrier broken, right? But you also think of the fact, like, everyone who is neglected, ignored, oppressed, pushed out of the design field, that creates the pathway by which I, in the late 21st century, has to be the first. And I also say, and how I got here is I'm a super token. Now, as super token is defined, I define this, right, as an individual who comes from structurally excluded groups, who are so talented that the institutions want their talents so much that they're willing to put aside momentarily their aversion to the identities that the individual possesses. So this is the thing, we've seen the phenomena, right, with Dr. Claudine Gay, where it's like, oh, super talented, we love her talent, she's been here forever, we're gonna put her in the position of power and influence. Oh, fudge. Oh, well, maybe she's not as talented, her talent isn't as useful as we think it is, so we're going to abandon her because we want to go back to the comfort zone of us, our aversion to all the identities she represents, right? That's how it happens. That's the tragedy in many ways of being a super token, because it's all on the talent the usefulness of the talent. Now, my talent is I am really smart. And I'm smart in a way that's useful. My smart is like, I'm the queen of pattern recognition, and I'm trained as an anthropologist, so guess whose patterns that I'm able to sort of recognize is people. And when you can recognize the patterns of people, it kind of gives you an edge in predicting future possibilities. And the design part, I'm a design anthropologist, is that I can help you design for those future possibilities. So that's very useful if you're really wanting to create the conditions of the future. So that is my talent. But again, it's a double-edged sword, because I also identify the patterns that are happening in the institution and use that creative intelligence from the design to figure out how to disrupt those patterns. So there's always an edge of a super token. There's always the edge of the talent being used to dismantle the institution. But it's also a place of isolation. It's also a place, again, of like deep hurt, because your job is to go against the institution every freaking day. And as we are learning, when you push against the institution, they push back hard. And so even as a super token, you are vulnerable. Even as a super token, and I had power, like real power. I would say no to stuff, and stuff would not happen. That's when you know you have power, right? It's like, I don't think this is going to work out in the way that my people would want this. So let's do something else. And something else happened. That is true power, and that's where we want to be in positions of power. The ability to stop harm by saying no to the decision that is going to create harm. But again, it's isolating. And that isolation is intentional. That's why it's a token. We can only have one, right? Because when you're isolated, you're not always thinking your best. When you're isolated, there's a lot of fear. And when you're isolated, again, there's a wedge between you and your community and your family and all of the people who could ground you into making better decisions, less harmful decisions. So it is by design that super tokens are kept isolated. And so the antidote is community, which we are all done, which the vision, right? The vision of the book, An Anthology of Blackness, and the vision of this conference is to make sure we are all grounded in community, in our super tokenness, because I imagine I've been hearing people's stories, and this is like the super token show, right? This is the super token show. So the antidote is community, and this is where it gets really fast, because the antidote is community, because when you have community, you can make stuff happen. So, as Dean of Design at OCAD University, as the super token, I was like, I'm here to build community. Y'all not gonna keep me in isolation, because I know that, like, my career is all about keeping me in isolation, and y'all gave me power, and y'all don't know what I'm going to do with that power, but the first thing I'm going to do is build a community around me. So, but I put indigenous first. So one of the strategies we did was cluster hires. And the thing that people don't realize is that OCAD University never had money. Like, as dean of design, I had like a $14 million budget, which became a $12 million budget, which became a $10 million budget, then went up to $11 million budget because there was some money that was kicked in the COVID, but then it's gone back down to $10 million budget. So we never had money. All this happened because the institution decided there was another way of doing things. We're going to prioritize this because it's important to our future of design that we have the diversity of people to teach our students, to connect with our communities. So everyone says, oh, we can't do this because we have no budget. It's like, no, you just have wrong priorities, and allow me to help you reprioritize, right? But we had to make a call, because when you're ignored by an institution for many, many years, you're not listening to them. You're not listening. So we wrote a position, we set up a cluster hire, because that's a retention strategy. You bring in one person, you're not going to keep them. Isolation. Build community. Automatically community when you bring in a cluster of people. Even if it's a thing where you can't bring them all at once, at least in a period of 2 or 3 years, you should have a cluster of people. This protects them from the white supremacy of the institution. They have a little microcosm that they've created where it's like, oh my gosh, all my life I had to fight, but not in this room. Let me get rest. I'm like a big fan of the nap ministry, right? It's like, let me get my rest so I can go back and fight again, right? So we had to have cluster hires, and we had to look for certain people, because the other part of the super token is some of them were like, I got mine. That's it. I don't care about community. I got mine. So we had to weed out people and create a community that, A, had lived experiences, this time in Blackness. First time in indigeneity, this time in Blackness. Had to have connection to the community. And thirdly, it had to show up in their work. Because if you're going to teach our young people how to bring who they are into the work, and you have this beautiful award-winning body of work in which I cannot identify who you are, who you be, you ain't got nothing to teach our people. Because you haven't taught yourself. You haven't taught yourself. So we screened for those things, and we called to things that were important to the Black community. Hip-hop aesthetics, yes, please bring it on. Oh my God, like I love, where are you, Milan? Drake, and your like mixtape manifesto, like I love that, right? Call to the community. We are interested in Black futures. We are interested in hip-hop aesthetics. We are interested in all of these things that are important to our community, not just whatever skills we want to extract. We had to change the criteria of evaluation. Because, you know, for many of our communities, we have been structurally excluded from institutions of post-secondary education. So why would you set up a system that requires a minimum of 3 years of direct engagement with post-secondary institutions, which has kept us out? And that doesn't mean that brilliance doesn't exist. It exists in the community. So we had community connector personas. We had, again, it exists professionally. You kicking your butt didn't have to have a degree to kick butt, especially in design, right? You didn't have to have a degree. So we said, these people are doing the work. They're just doing it in a different context. Let's open it up. And we be community. And when you're in community, that was successful. Again, OCAD University went from 0 to 5 full-time Black faculty in just the Faculty of Design. We have at OCAD, because we hired even more, even after I left. So now we have about 15 full-time Black faculty across all of the different faculty. And we politic, so this is just a copy of the letter that we wrote for the Foundation for Black Communities, advocating for them to receive the $200 million that the Canadian government was going to give to a Black organization. So we said, Black Caucus, that's who we be. We are the Black Caucus. We're going to support them. We connected, like we did these amazing projects with Black community, and again, I was doing that as the super token alone, but it exploded because I had like 15 other people to do that work in community. And we got the bag. So when my last act as Dean of Design and Black Mayor of OCAD University was to set up $100,000 endowed Black Design Caucus endowment for perpetuity. That was really important. And it was for us, by us. The money came from, hey, I give a talk to Microsoft and they're going to pay me $40,000, so I'm going to put that in the caucus endowment fund so that our Black folks who will be able to serve community, because all the activities we did was to serve students and serve community. And more importantly, now that I am gone, because you never know whether or not you're doing structural change, if it's reliant on the energy of a person, a super token person, and I have like super energy. So I know like if I'm engaged or something, it's like, it's gonna happen, right? But if I'm not part of it, does it continue? And it does. So I set up the first homecoming fete, which is why I was so happy to see the marching band, but everyone in Canada, because of the Black culture is Caribbean, they actually didn't know what I was talking about with the marching band, but it's okay, because they fed it. But this is the second one that they held without me. They announced just recently the new Black Studies in Design and Art minor. So again, you have 15 folks who are teaching about Black culture. Guess what? You can put that together in a package so that the Black students can find their way through. You can't do that if you're a super token of one. You need community to change the structures. And there's a bunch of other stuff that you can read the book, right? Get the book. If you don't have the book, get the book, read the book in terms of it. But what I want to leave us with is that we are driven to change pain into joy in order to make it easier for the next generation. And what is so beautiful about the conversations that have happened for the last 2 days is not only do we have elders, and I'm looking at you, Dr. Cheryl Miller, who have paved the way, but we have like, I feel like in this room, we are at Gen 4. I'm trying to calculate in my math. We are at Generation 4. And every generation has done the work to open up. And the people here, all they've been articulating is how much more work they're gonna do to make it easier, to make sure there is community built in. So we are doing the work. We are part of the struggle, and we're making the struggle easier for the next generation. So all our life, we've had to fight. But we gonna be all right. We're gonna be all right. We're gonna be all right. Do you hear me? Can you feel me? Say it with me. We gonna be all right. Thank you very much.